Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out on a sunny day when it's spring-ish here, or spring at least by New England standards. I'm pleased to welcome a distinguished guest, Professor Peter Phan, and I want to thank my colleague Benny Liu for, Benny disappeared somewhere. He went way in the back. There he is, for his help setting this up and making this happen today. Peter Phan is a native of Vietnam. He emigrated as a refugee to the United States in 1975. Peter has three doctorates, a doctorate in sacred theology from the Universitas Pontificia Salesiana in Rome, a doctorate of philosophy and doctor of divinity from the University of London. He's also awarded an honorary doctor of theology from Chicago Theological Union and the honorary doctor of humane letters from the College of Our Lady of the Elms. He began his teaching career in philosophy at the age of 18 at Don Bosco College, Hong Kong. In the United States, he's taught at the University of Dallas, at the Catholic University of America, where he held the Warren Blanding Chair of Religion and Culture, at Union Theological Seminary in New York, at Elms College in Chicopee, and at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin, a place I know and love. And finally at Georgetown University in Washington, where he's the Ignacio Ellacuria Chair of Catholic Social Thought. He's the first non-Anglo to be elected president of the Catholic Theological Society of America. In 2010, he was given the John Courtney Murray Award, the highest honor that the Catholic Theological Society of America gives, in recognition for his outstanding and distinguished achievement in theology. His publications range far and wide in theology. They deal with the theology of the icon in Orthodox theology, a book, Culture and Ecclesiology, the iconographical vision of Paul Evkomodov. I should have asked you that one beforehand. In patristic theology, a book, Social Thought, Grace in the Human Condition. In eschatology, a number of books. In the history and mission in Asia. And in liberation, enculturation, and interreligious dialogue, a book, Christianity with an Asian Face, that I've liked in particular. In Our Own Tongues, Being Religious Interreligiously among them. In addition, he's edited some 20 volumes. His work has been translated into Italian, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian, and Vietnamese. You had to have it translated to Vietnamese? You couldn't do that yourself? He's the editor of the multi-volume series entitled Theology in Global Perspective for Orbis Books, and a multi-volume series entitled Ethnic American Pastoral Spirituality for Paulist Press. His writings have received many awards from learned societies. His talk today is timely, titled Church of Migrants and Migrant Church, Theology of the Church in the Age of Migration. So please join me in welcoming Peter Phan.
Thank you, Tom. Let me begin by thanking you all for coming this afternoon. You could have done a lot better things with the sun outside rather than stay inside the room for about an hour or so. I'd like to thank Tom and Benny for inviting me here. This is my third time to Holy Cross. The first time was about 35 years ago, before any one of you was born. And the second time to give a lecture here, not in this wonderful room, but some other room, but about 14, 15 years ago. So this is my third time, and I am very pleased to be back here. Now, the topic I'd like to address and to ask you to think along with me is the question this. Could there be a Catholic Church without migration? So that's the topic and the thesis. Of course, I will maintain that there would not be a Catholic Church at all. Catholic both in the terms of Catholicity, meaning universal, but also in the sense of geographically dispersed throughout the world without migrations. So my topic will be developed in two basic theses. The first thesis is this: outside of migration, there is no church. Now, those of you who are a bit older would remember the famous principle in Catholic theology: outside the church, there is no salvation. Extra ecclesiam nulla salus. I maintain that outside of migration, there is no church. extra migrationem nulla ecclesia. I will show that through history. This is not a very difficult thesis to show, but at least it requires some sort of broad knowledge of the development of Christianity in the world. Briefly, I will show you that Christianity became a universal religion and not just a Jewish sect. It moved from being a Jewish sect of the first century of the Common Era to a universal church, the Catholic Church, universal church, thanks to 10 major migratory movements, mass migration. So I will go one by one with you, not in detail because we have no time, but I will highlight these 10 movements throughout the history of the church to show that without migrations, there would be not church at all. But there is a second thesis I'd like to show, which is much harder and much more controversial. I do not think I would convince you necessarily, but this is the time to put out there because this is a few chances you can put out controversial ideas without being accused of heretics and so forth, because all of you are very gentle and kind. My second thesis is this. Because without migration, there is no church. And because the church is the locus of salvation, the place where salvation occurs, I maintain that outside of migration, there is no salvation. Now, that is a big thing to show, but at least I will try to show that. So that's all I like to do this afternoon with you. So you can fall asleep now and you wake up in 34, 40 minutes and you see exactly what I will do. Now, I look at the audience. How many of you are first-generation migrants? I see only Benny Liu, that's the only thing. Very rare individual. How many of you have ancestors, parents, grandparents who come from, let's say, somewhere else? Okay, that's a little better. Right. How many of you think that migration or immigration is a current crisis in the United States? 1, 2. How many of you think that building the wall in the South would be the solution to the migration crisis now we are experiencing? None of you want to give money to build the wall? Oh man, that's crazy. President Trump would not be pleased with you today. So let me start with this. It is a fact, a sociological fact, that we are living in what we call the age of migration. Our time, the last 20, 25 years, have been characterized as the age of migration. There is a little book. If you want to study on migration, and you want to teach a course on migration, there is one book, the title which is The Age of Migration. It's one of the best single-volume study of migration throughout the world, right? The United Nations has pointed out 2 years ago, there was a report of the United Nations with about, it says, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee in 2018 report that there are today 319 million migration in the world. That's a large number of people. In the United States, about 300 million of Americans today. There are greater number of migrants in the world than the number of American population. So At least in terms of numbers, it is a very current crisis that we have to deal with. Right. Second, what do you mean by migrant? The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees use the term refugee. They don't use the term migrant. They use the term refugee to refer to people who are forced to leave their country. So it is forced migration. If you read something like migrant for the documents of the United Nations, that's what they mean. People who are forced to leave the country for a number of reasons. War, violence, religious persecution, right? And recently, this is very important to know, by ecological disasters. These people who are forced to leave their country because water came, think of the Midwest right now, right? Because of the rising sea level, these people are now recognized as refugees. Now, if you follow a little bit on ecological studies, you know that there's a report recently in maybe 25 years or so, if nothing is being done to prevent the climate change, there'll be disasters throughout the world. Now think, for instance, I just give you a few examples. Think of the islands in the Pacific Islands. Right? There are countries that simply disappear overnight because the sea level rise. And then wipe out the entire state. No more citizenship, no more passport. They could never go home because there's no home to come back to. People who are refugees because of war may eventually go home. You may go back to Iraq, to Iran, to Africa. You can go back. But people who lose their home because of climate change, and this is not a hoax. Climate change is not something invented by people. People lost their home and their countries and their state because of climate change. I see Father come from India. If there is a sea level rise by a few inches, the entire Bangladesh will be underwater. And because the sea level, sea water, there'll be no possibility of agriculture, nothing anymore. It's wasteland. It's worse than an atomic bomb because no one can come back that today because no one can grow anything from land that has been contaminated, invaded by seawater. So you see that these are the tremendous problem, not crisis, problems that we are facing today. I don't need to go on like this for long, but I'd just like to remind you that migration is a current issue that not only Europe, a few years ago, Germany, people from Syria and so forth, they came to Europe, and today even the United States are facing this problem. I am not going into discussing with you whether it is a boon, a blessing, or a calamity. You may imagine what the United States would be or would have been without the coming of migrants. Right? I will talk about that later. When you talk about migrants, you also mention between legal migration, then we call it illegal or better undocumented migration. So that's one issue. You talk about migration that is permanent or temporary. A lot of people come to the United States not to live here, not to settle down, years ago maybe, but today they come here and work and they go home. Many of these seasonal migrants, many Mexicans come here and get to work, and then they go home. And indeed, The dream of many of them is to go home and not to stay here. But there is between, therefore, the provisional or temporary migrant versus the settlers. And the issues are very different in terms of people who want to come here and stay, in terms of those people come here and then go home. Different story. Most importantly, there is a distinction between international refugees. And when you talk about them, you refer to these people. Refugee meaning people from other countries come to this country. But there's a much greater number, maybe 4 or 5 times more refugees when they're called internally displaced person, IDP. Now, these people too experience a lot of problems, issues, challenges. And the largest number of IDP, internally displaced persons, they too have to move from their homes and their villages. You know where it is? China. China has the largest number of IDPs. And because of globalization, people move not necessarily outside of their country, but simply within the bounds of their country, but still facing the same challenges or challenges. So of these are the people we refer today in terms of migration. Now, one last point before I come into the 10 migratory movement. Very often, when you talk about migrations, we think in terms of either economic, social, political, and social perspectives. And if you want to look at the literature on migration, this is what you find. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of websites that talks about migration as an economic issues. Okay? How do we change the economy and so forth, to how you take care of these people? And then political issue, are they citizen, not citizen? Do we grant them permanent residency or not? And then cultural issues, whether they can be incorporated into the whole society. Now, I am much aware that this is a kind of literature that you read about migration. There are hundreds of literature, hundreds of thousands of websites. You type in and you see it come down millions of those things. The one thing that there's so little talk about, written about, discussed, is the religious dimension of migration. It's just the beginning. You find some books about, but not much. Theologians, and they don't care much about migration. I am perhaps one of the very few think seriously about this. But mostly it's politicians, law, legal aspect as well. Lawyers talk about migration and so forth, economists, politics, but very little about theology. It means this. It means that migration has not yet caught the imagination and the concern of people of faith and church leaders. Pope Francis, you know who he is, right? Pope Francis is the first and only one so concerned about migrants. If you look at his speeches right after his election as Pope, again, he talks about migration. When he came to the United States for the first time 3-4 years ago, right? He stood in front of the White House, the lawn of the White House, and he said, I come here as a child of migrants. Because his parents were Italian who went to Argentina, and he was born there. So he said, I come here as a migrant, a child of migration, to a country made up of migrations. He could have added, but he did not, he could have added that the American Catholic Church would not existed at all without the migrants. It was the migrants that built the American Catholic Church. I don't need to be long on this. I don't need to elaborate this point. But anyone who read a little bit about the American Catholic Church knows that it was the migrants, beginning with the Germans, and then the Irish, and then the Southern European, Italians, and so on. They build the church. An American Catholic Church would not exist at all without the work of the migrants, not the bishops, not the priests, but the lay migrants who come here and build their churches. Then let's now come to the famous first question. If migration must catch the attention and drive the concern of Christians, then we have to raise the question, would there be a church, a Christian church, not simply Catholic, but Christian church, without migration? Let me go with you to 10 migration, and then we can look at it. So there is no church without migration. Why it is indisputable that the American Catholic Church, the demographic of the American Catholic Church, depends on a continuous arrival of fresh migrants who bring in new, as it were, blood, new ideas, new church life, and everything else that bring in. It is less clear that the church as a whole, as a Christian church, as Christianity, is also dependent on migration. So there you have this idea. The first idea I'd like to put it out is that the first movement, mass movement of migrants, is the movement from Jerusalem, the first migration that moved Christianity from a Jewish sect to a ethnically diverse and open to all countries and people. And the first movement was after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, as you all know, the year 70 AD. With that, the Christians left Jerusalem and went up north to Damascus, where, as you know, they were known as Christians for the first time. At the time, the word Christian was not an honorific title. It was a sort of kind of dismissive, oh, they are Christian, Christ Christians. But it was there that the church realized for the first time they are not limited to the Jewish people, but now open to Greeks and Samaritans and so forth. And so the idea that the church is no longer an ethnic group is brought about precisely because of migration, the first migration. The second phase, so I'm very quick here. The second phase is when the church now, after the year 135 or so AD, the church now spent not only in Syria, but it become moving into the West. So you have the Mediterranean world. Apostle Paul already started that. But afterwards you have the Christians. Again, it's not because the church wanted to do it. It's because the people migrate. Because of commerce, because persecutions, the first few years persecution, they just move. They move from there, from Syria, and basically to the West, and then the famous Mediterranean area. So the first 5 patriarchates, okay? You have Jerusalem, Antioch in the north, the south Alexandria, you have Rome, and then Constantinople. think of this. This is not something like a pope thinking of have a plan or, 20 years plan to do this. This has happened by chance. The people simply move. But Christianity now become a Mediterranean reality. At the same time, let's not forget, at the same time, also the Christians moved to the east. To the east. And so from there, they go to Pakistan, the middle, Central Asia, Pakistan, India, and China. Now, many textbooks of church history pay very little to this group. These people do not speak Latin or Greek. They spoke Syriac. Syriac was a common language of the people, and they moved. And where is it? Why? Because of commerce, of trade, of money, changing money. And it's along the so-called Silk Road. You have heard of this? The Silk Road, that's from Beijing all the way to Syria. And the people move. They move not because they were sent by bishop or priest. They simply move because they need to move in order to survive. Migrants, they just move. Right? And along the way, they spread the good news. So you have St. Thomas, the apostle, basically thought to arrive in India at the age 52. And then in the 7th century, a lot of monks from Syria went to China. The whole world became Christian, not because of any explicit design, but because of migrants. So that's the next mass movement. So imagine yourself, look at the map for the moment. See, people just move. And it's always migrants who did. So the people go to the market, buy food, buy stuff, exchange silk and everything else. And they would ask, where you come from, right? Where you come? Oh, I came from Palestine. Why you come here? Oh, I just come here to buy stuff and bring back. What religion do you? Oh, we are Christian. Never heard of them. I heard of Buddhists, Hindus, and all that, but never heard of Christian. Who are you? Well, and then they start telling the story. Well, Christian because we follow the teaching of Jesus. There are no bishop and priest going around preaching the gospel. It's the people, the migrants. I call it the gossiping of the gospels. You go to the market, people ask, what do you do? And then you start telling the story. And after a while, they say, well, we need to build a church. Oh, we need to build a priest. Bishop and priest did very little. This is the myth, the propaganda story that we bishops and pope try to tell you. That's not true at all. It's all the migrant people moving around telling the story of Jesus. Next mass movement. Imagine this. The year 325. 337. Sorry, 337. Christianity by that time has spread in the Mediterranean world, mostly. And then to the east. And then one guy decided to become a Christian on his deathbed. You know who he is? Emperor Constantine. You know the story, right? And by the way, I just read the motto of this college was that in Oxenio Vinces. You know this? Do you know that the motto of your school? No? Oh my God. It's called in this sign you win. In Oxenio Vinces. Come, check the website. Now, Constantine was supposed to be receiving this sign, saw in heaven the cross and so on. And so he conquered, and he became a Christian, and he turned Christianity into an imperial religion. This is the worst thing that ever happened to Christianity. make Christianity an imperial religion. And then he get the idea. I get the idea that let's move my capital from Rome to somewhere in between Asia and the West, the East and the West. What city is that? Well, of course, he's very humble. He called it Constantinople, right? Named after him. But it today is Istanbul, right? Turkey. It's the place, the Bosphorus just right there in between. You go to the West, you go to Europe, to the East, you go to Asia Minor and so forth. Now, imagine for a moment, you are the Bishop of Rome, you have surrounded with all the people, because by that time, Rome became the center, right? And Constantine said, oh, by the way, tomorrow I will move the capital to Constantinople. Where? Constantinople. That's my name. Constantinople is the city of Constantine, right? It's like Donald Trump naming the White House. Mar-a-Lago is like his White House, right? But people don't pay attention that this constitutes the fourth major mass movement of Christianity. The shifting of the center of gravity of Christianity from Rome to Istanbul. So imagine then the next day the bishops, the cardinals, I say, oh, we have to move. We have to move to Constantinople. We have to rent an apartment. You have to buy houses and so forth. That's a mass movement that creates a new Christianity. The Christianity that has very little to do with Western Latin Christianity. What Christianity is that? Byzantine Christianity. Byzantine Christianity. It's so different from the Latin Christianity. The language is Greek, the culture for theology, the liturgy, the organization of the church are so different. So much so that by the 10th century, with the crisis of the Patriarch Photius, the two churches separate, and one excommunicated and another, right? The Latin church excommunicated the Greek church excommunicated the Latin church. You don't know which is the true church anymore, right? And the result is that thanks to mass migration of these Christians to Istanbul, you have a new form of Christianity. Not simply geographically, but essentially the face of the church has been changed. Is that clear? Next movement of mass migration is the movement of the Northern European tribes that move south. Have you heard of the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, Western, Eastern Goths? They move down. They moved from Germany, basically, two groups. One group moved south, so France, Italy, and above all, Spain. They created new Christianity, the Christianity of the barbarians. And then another group left and went to England, Scotland, Ireland. They are called the Anglo-Saxons. Now, if you look at the history of the church in the 8th century, you see there are two kinds of Christianity. Even in the West, there are two kinds of Christianity. The Anglo-Saxon Christianity, and the center is Canterbury and Ireland, all the monks and monastery in Ireland. And then you have the Western Christianity, France, Germany, Rome, Seville in Spain, and all the way down to Africa. That is a different Christianity. Who decided this? Bishops? Popes? Writing encyclical say you have to go? Not at all. It's the people who move. become. All right? I hope I have shown you little by little how Christianity become Catholic. The next major movement is the so-called discovery of the New World in the beginning of the 14th, 15th century. Imagine Europe now, and particularly that time, is Spain and Portugal, right? The Iberian countries. They don't have a broom, they don't have money, they don't have. Say, let's go and discover a new world, right? So Christopher Columbus, America, come to the United States. And when they come, mass people, massive amount of people, exchange of commerce, they come here, they discover food, bring back home, and so forth. But at the same time, the faithful came along, and they established what we call today the Latin American Church. Right? And the Latin American Church is very different from the Roman Church. Very different. You have a new Christianity, a new face of Christianity. And then in the 16th century, they said, well, Latin America is fine, but we need to go to the East. So people go to Japan, China, Vietnam, develop another Christianity. That's not a mass movement. And then in the 19th century, you have a different mass movement of people to Africa. And you have the African churches. African churches are the last one to come. Next movement is the deportation of 13 million Africans as slaves to the United States and Latin America. It remained the most massive forced migration in the history of the world. It doesn't really mass migration, force. But when they come to this country, they brought in a new form of Christianity, which is not Irish, which is not German. What are they? Black churches. Have you ever attended a black church worship? Compare that with the Irish Mass. Oh my God, it is so boring. Irish Mass, people say rosary, and the other one is dancing. It's a different form of Christianity. And because the slaves, they brought with them African religions and all that come up here. And from the south, the great migration is from the south to the north. And when they come to the north, they were not accepted by the Baptists, the Anglicans and so forth. They are not real Christians. They do not worship like we do. And so they separate. They turn into black churches. Study the black church's tradition in this country. And you see how this migration of people from Africa, 13 million people come to this, and then from there they spread throughout the United States. That next mass movement, World War I. You have, even in Europe, countries lose their name. Poland switch hands so many times, become Russia, become Prussia, and become all this. Name a country, France and Germany and so forth. Massive amount of people move, not only because of war, surely because of the war, destruction of cities, they move, but also because they were brought in order to produce arms in certain countries for the war. And so you have shifting of people from their home and different kind of Christianities, Polish Christianity, German Christianity, Russian Christianity, and then French and Italian, they're all emerging, and you have this another new church. Second World War. Again, so many people came, occupied the other countries to colonize. And after 1945-47, huge colonies come back to Europe. So not only they went to Asia and Africa, but after the independence of those countries, They turned back to Europe, brought with them a new form of Christianity. And then finally, my 10th movement is globalization today. The last 50 years, maybe. People today move from north to south, south to north, east and west. They hop on the plane, they come here, they study here, and then they may go home or they may stay here and so forth. Today, with globalization, economic globalization, and then you have the political globalization, the spread of democracy throughout the world, and you have cultural globalization where you could go downtown Worcester and eat Chinese food or Vietnamese food or any kind of food, clothing, music, the young people. You go to China, there are more Michael Jackson there for sale than in this country. It's a whole mixture of these people, and new faces of churches come up all the time. Those of you who participate in Mexican churches, go to Mexican or Latin or Mexican, in this country, in Boston area, a lot of Portuguese. You go and see. This is not the way most of your grandparents worship. They're different. Not only because of language, but the style of worshiping, who God is for them, and so forth. So there you have. How many more minutes I have? Should I stop? Or no? Not yet, not yet. My point here are twofold. First, the church became universal not because of church policy. That's for sure. No one determined that way. It all happened because of migration. And migration over which they have no control at all. It's a wonderful lesson for ecclesiology. Changes in the church does not come from above down. It's from the people, whatever they do. And migration is one of those things. Second, every time there's a mass movement, the face of the church changes. Become Catholic not simply geographically, but Catholic in the sense of multicultural, multi-church. The face of the church changes. The way we worship, the way we organize the church, the way we think about God, we think about salvation, the way that we think about the sacrament, all changes because of migration. Now, the last part. Would it be possible for us to think of what church is? So far, I have said the church of migrants, right? The first phrase of my title, the church of migrants. But can we say the migrant church? When I say the migrant church, I want to discuss its nature, its essence, its way of being, the characteristics of the true church. Now, those of you who are again older among us will remember that we used to talk about the 4 marks of the church, the true church. You go on Sunday, you recite the creed. At the end, towards the third part of the creed, what do you say? I believe in one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. We grew up with that idea. The true church will have 4 marks, right? It has to be one, not divided, holy. And so, even though most of us are sinful, but the church is holy because God is holy, because Christ is holy, because the Holy Spirit is holy, because the sacrament is holy. Catholic, because open to all, not reserved only to white people or black people or yellow people, open to all. And then apostolic. Now, I suggest to you one more thing. Next Sunday, when you go to church and you say the creed, and we believe in one holy, Catholic, apostolic, and migrant church. The characteristics of the true church is a migrant church. The church does not dwell in one place, but the church keep moving. People on the move. is the best description of what church is. People on the move, because God is a God who is on the move. God is the most wonderful, the primordial migrant in the history of mankind. I am writing a long article, which is not the topic today, on God as a migrant in the Old Testament. And you read the Hebrew scripture again. Amazing how migration is the central story of everything the Hebrew scripture talks about. What was the first act that God performed in history? Besides Genesis chapter 1, chapter 11, the creation, the flood, all that. Besides that, that's prehistory. What was the first act that God makes, God performed in history? No, this is, Abraham. He told Abraham, get up and move from your home and your parents. The first act that God performed in history is to make Abraham into the first migrant of history. He didn't do anything else. First saying, go, leave your house, your father, go to the land I will show you. Abraham is the first migrant in human history, according to the Bible. What else? What is the second act of migration that God does? Liberation of the Hebrews from Egypt. That is the first mass movement that made the Jews, the Hebrews, into a nation, holy nation, people of God. That's a migration. Exodus is a migration. I don't know how many. Now, the Bible says million, I don't care. But maybe 74,000 people, something like that. But that's a mass migration. And they migrate how many years? 40 years wandering in the desert. They did not take direction for the women, and they did not have GPS. That's why 40 years around. The woman said, go this way. No, we go this way. That's the problem. That's a mass movement. The mass movement that make the Hebrews into the covenanted people of God. And all throughout this, what did God do? You know? What did He migrated with these people. Where? In a famous tabernacle. The little bit of thing, they bring out the tent. Every time they go to some place, the first thing they put out the tabernacle, right? And who dwell in that tabernacle? God. Right? And then when they decide to go, live up and move. God migrated with the people of Israel throughout Israel. 40 years he migrated. I have a text, I didn't want to cite it here. It said, I have nowhere to live except in the tent. That's what it is. I live in the tent 40 years. God said that to David and said, okay, you want to build me a temple, that's fine. Because for 40 years I have nowhere to live. I just move around in the tent. And then Solomon, the day of dedication of the temple, he said the same thing. He said, God said to my father David, I have nowhere to live because I had a tent, a tabernacle. You can see, once you see migration and you read it in the Old Testament, you said, oh my God, migration everywhere. The next big migration, the year 586 BCE, what's that? The destruction of Judah by the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, and the people moved from there to Babylonia. And God went with them. So that's a big migration again. And that migration changed the entire biblical religion into Judaism. Without that migration, there is no Judaism today. The Judaism that is based on the Torah, on the synagogue, that was not the Judaism before the 6th century. But because of migration, people went to Babylonia. They have no temple, no priesthood, no kingship, anything else. they start saying, okay, what makes us one as a Jewish people? The Torah, the 5 books of Moses. That's the basis of Judaism. Now, I can go on and on and on to tell you that this is the way how God acts in the history of humankind in order to make us saved. God saved us by migrating with us. Finally, let me conclude. How did Christians address each other in the first 100 years? How do they call the bishop? How they call the priest? How they call each other? When they write letters from one city to another city, for example, Clement of Rome, remember? And wrote to the people in Corinth, because in Corinth there a lot of problem there, a lot of fighting, and he wrote a nice letter. How did Pope Clement address them? No? You don't know? Okay, here I read to you. From the people of God in Rome, quote, the church of God which sojourns in Rome, to the church of God which sojourns in Corinth. Amazing. I didn't say your excellency, your eminence, nothing like that. This is the church which sojourns in Rome, to the church of God which sojourns in Corinth. I have many other texts. But the Greek term of sojourn in Rome is paroikusa. Paroikusa. Now, the Christians have 3 terms to call each other. When they shake, they meet each other the first time, they wouldn't call you father or Jesuit or whatever. They call them resident alien. That's your name. Resident alien. Or you are a stranger. Or you are a sojourner, paroikos. And the one letter I ask you to read, just go on the internet, type in letter to Diognetus, Diognetus, Diognetus. Just very short, 2 or 3 pages. In that letter, and we don't know who wrote it, but we know it sometime in the 2nd century, okay? 2nd century. And he said to us, Christians are strangers, are alien resident. We have the land, but we do not have it. We have a citizen, but we are citizen, we are not citizen, because we are migrant. That deep awareness that Christians are migrant. Unfortunately, as I said, when Emperor Constantine turned Christianity to an imperial religion, the sense of being a migrant is lost. It's lost. Now they are citizens. Now they are citizens of the Roman Empire. Now their own land, their own churches and everything. This is not what the Christians are. Now, as you know, the English word, you have a parish, right? You have parish around here. The parish comes from the Greek term paroikia, which means stranger, foreigner, resident alien. So if you say, I ask you, which parish you from? You say, I am the parishioner of Saint what? Whatever parish here. Whatever parish. You have a parish here? What saint? Saint Bridget. Saint Bridget. Okay, I am a parishioner of Saint Bridget Parish. Now, in your mind, you are a parishioner because your house is there. Maybe you were born there, baptized there, married there, and hopefully buried there as well. But that's not what the term Pyrrhikos means. Pyrrhikos means a migrant. So if I ask you, which planet are you from? You have to say, theologically, I am a migrant of the St. Bridget. So next time, please do not call your bishop your excellency. Call him you, migrant in chief. Because if he is not a migrant, he is not the bishop of this place. The migrant. So the migration therefore becomes a characteristic of the true church. If the church, and I say that, if I have white Pentecostals, if you do not accept migrants among you, you cannot be a Christian. Because your identity is defined by being a migrant. Migration has brought the church out of Palestine. The mass movement made the church universal. But it's also because God is the migrant that who accompanies the Abraham, the first place, following for the Hebrews from Egypt, from the Jews, and then the early. God is always on the move, migrant. So in my book, who will be published by Oxford University Press, maybe next year, I call God the original migrant. Original migrant. Without God migration into the world, there is no world. Without God entering into history as a migrant, moving with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the rest, there's no God's people. And without God moving with the church throughout the 10 movement, I said, there's no Catholic Church. Therefore, my thesis is, outside of migration, there is no salvation. So not only outside of migration, there is no church, which can be proved historically, but theologically, we also say without migration, there is no salvation. And if you want to write a master's thesis or senior thesis, think of Jesus as the paradigmatic migrant. You can write wonderful things about it. He's a guy who said, I have nowhere to lay my head, right? Nowhere to lay my head. Who is the one who has nowhere to lay her head, if not a migrant? Has nowhere to go. And had to go, but it's nowhere to go. So Jesus, God is the original, the primordial migrant. God is the Deus Migrator, the primordial one. And Jesus is the paradigmatic. He gave us an example of how to be a migrant. And the Holy Spirit? The Holy Spirit is the driving force, the energy that drives people forward into their migration. And not to sit down. Okay? So if Nietzsche never imagined that Nietzsche would say this. Now, I would quote Nietzsche in this lecture. Nietzsche would say that the greatest sin that you can, as a Christian, commit is to be stationary, to be in one place. And he said further, the thought that is worth entertaining is the thought you have as you walk. So migration, therefore, is not the force of human history. It's the very essence of being church. The church of migrants and the migrant church. Thank you very much.